Most incredible castles you must see.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Titanic. I'm your host, Alexa. Castles hold so much history inside their walls, and today we have some really incredible ones to show you. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Before we get into it, can anyone guess what the oldest inhabited castle in the world is? It didn't make it onto the countdown, but that answer coming up later.
DONAN, Scotland. DONAN became famous when it was featured in a 1986 film, Highlander, about two immortal warriors battling out their age-old feud. The castle is reflected in the beautiful lochs that surround the island it is perched on, and is a proud part of Western Highlands history in Scotland. It has stood since the 13th century when built by Clan Mackenzie, but was destroyed in the 18th century and rebuilt in the 20th. Peleș Castle, Romania. This is basically a modern-day castle, as it was only completed 100 years ago, but it still has an old-world charm with its neo-Renaissance look. It's certainly beauty before age in this case, as this castle is a real looker in the countryside near Bucharest and boasts beautiful murals within the inner courts. HIGHCLERE Castle, United Kingdom. Another famous location from the screen. HIGHCLERE is the set of Downton Abbey, the much-loved historical period drama that's got everyone back to enjoying high tea. Since the 18th century, the castle has been owned by the Caernarfon family and was the center of politics in the late Victorian era. And then in the Edwardian era, it became even more popular in status. Luckily, you can poke a head in if you are in the area, as it's open to the public every July and August. MONTE, France. This beautiful castle is steeped in history and inhabits its own island off the coast of Normandy. You usually get there by boat, or at low tide you can walk along a sandy path right to its doorstep. Just time your exit or you will have wet feet on the way home. It has served as a monastery, housed royals, and is now a much-loved outing for locals and tourists. The tourism center is great and boasts a lovely tea room, harbors to explore, and beautiful stone walking paths. Bran Castle, Romania.
Romania really corners the market when it comes to medieval castles, with its reputation for vampires and creatures of the night. But there's a lot more to the history of this area than Transylvanian Dracula antics.
Bran Castle is the 13th century stronghold of the Teutonic Knights, and the castle was built in the 1300s. It overlooks the village of Bran with its spires, turrets, and towers, and welcomes tourists to wander through narrow stairways, secret underground passages, and timbered rooms of the medieval era. Château de CHENONCEAU, France. This basically sums up a typical French castle in almost everybody's imagination. It truly is beautiful though, perched within the Loire Valley. It is nothing short of iconic in the region. The chateau, as we see it today, was built between 1514 and 1522. It is popular with tourists, so it can be really busy at peak times. If you make it there, don't miss the gallery on the bridge or the proper life-size maze on the grounds. FREDERIKSBORG Castle, Denmark. Denmark boasts some of the most beautiful castles in Europe, which is quite an achievement for such a small country. Topping the list of these must-see castles is Frederiksborg Castle. It's nearly 300 years old and open for you to explore and experience the majestic environment the European blue blood enjoyed. The Great Hall will leave you in awe, and there are paintings inside the castle painted by Frederiksborg, the King of Denmark and Norway from 1559 to 1588. The chapel is ornate and beautiful, so don't miss it if you head to this part of the world. Alnwick Castle, Northumberland.
Harry Potter fans will know Alnwick Castle already. It was used as the interior and the exterior of Hogwarts for the films. But for the rest of it, here are the facts.
Alnwick is really old. The oldest parts of it were built in 1096. After the demise of the family who built it, it was under the ownership of the Percy family until the present day. Some of the family of the current duke still live in parts of the castle, but it's still open to the public. Shows are hosted there, and many films use the castle and grounds for locations. So, although nearly 1,000 years old, it's a very active castle in many respects. MALBORK Castle, Poland. MALBORK Castle is the largest castle in the world measured by land area, which is understandable seeing as at one point it had over 3,000 knights housed within it. Castle of the Teutonic Order in Malbork, as it is known in full, was completed in 1406, and at the time was the largest brick historic castle in the world, so it's a heavyweight in the titles department. The castle was badly damaged during World War II, but has been restored and is now open for visitors. Castel del Monte, Italy. This is an original castle and not what you imagine when you think of medieval-era castles with turrets and towers. It looks like a fortress with an octagon facade with elements that are reminiscent of Northern European Cistercian Gothic and the Islamic Orient. It was built in the 13th century by Emperor Frederick II, and the fortress is almost entirely in its original state. It's had almost no major changes. It has a view of the forest surrounding from the rock peak it rests on. Warwick Castle, England. Warwick Castle was originally built by William the Conqueror, and it was developed from a wooden fort. That wasn't going to last long, and during the 12th century it was rebuilt using stone. The looming Caesar's Tower is worth a climb, and there are dark and damp dungeons to explore if you dare. Some of the original torture tools for punishment remain. There are often events and exhibitions on the grounds, and it is a great family outing destination, regardless of the torture tools. Castillo de Coca, Spain. The Archbishop of Seville bought the Castillo de Coca in the 15th century. The castle is decorated with mudéjar interiors, which are the Muslims of Al-Andalus. The design is a mix of architectural styles of both the Western and Moorish military designs. The exterior is made of brick, which is not very common in Europe. It really is a one-of-a-kind mix of cultures and styles. Neuschwanstein, Germany.
This castle was the inspiration for Disney's iconic Magic Castle. It's perched on a cliff, almost magically surrounded by a canopy of trees in the scenic mountain landscape of Bavaria. It really does tick all the boxes for a romantic-era castle built in the 19th century.
It was intended to be home for Ludwig II of Bavaria, and he built it using mostly his own money. Despite having slept 11 nights in the castle, he never saw it completed. It was opened to the public 6 weeks after his death to attempt to recoup finances and get the castle completed. Alhambra, Spain. This castle has seen a few celebs since it was built in the 13th century. It was built by Nasrid Emir Mohammed ben al-Ahmar of the Emirate of Granada, on top of Roman fortification ruins. It shows the Moorish architectural styles of the Muslim dynasty. A century later, Alhambra became the royal court of Ferdinand and Isabella. One of the most noteworthy visitors was Christopher Columbus, who is said to have got an endorsement for his expedition here. Be sure to plan your travel and book ahead. Entry is very limited and is booked real far in advance. Osaka Castle, Japan. The Osaka Castle symbolized the unification of Japan during the 16th century and remains one of the most visited castles in the country. Its distinct Japanese style in architecture boasts 5 tiers and 9 stories stacked high atop one another grandly. See it in all of its splendid glory during festival season when the cherry blossoms bloom at the same time. The Beaumaris Castle, Wales. This looming castle is a fortress that stands as a prime example of Britain's military construction of the time. It was the last and greatest castle built by King Edward I. It has a huge inner ring of defenses surrounded by fortified walls, 16 towers, and 2 gates laid out in geometric symmetry. It was never completed though, so didn't make it into the battle during the Civil War. Vianden Castle, Luxembourg. Vianden Castle is a prime example of Romanesque style, but there are a few Gothic-era additions made to it. The Roman influence is shown by the fortification and the semicircular arches in the design. Building started in the 10th century, but it took until the 14th century for building to cease. Yeah, over 400 years, and you thought your contractor took his time. Much like the fairy tale castles of this era, the Vianden Castle sits on top of a hill with a view of the nearby village. Caernarfon Castle, Wales. If you're on the castle trail, then Caernarfon Castle is a must. It is one of the most beautiful castles in Wales and nearly 1,000 years old. The Romans were the founding forefathers of the castle, but the castle was developed properly much later. One of the most famous features of the castle is the King and Queen's gates. Be sure to look out for them. Château de Pierrefonds, France. The chateau has a fairy tale charm, with towers and turrets, high walls, and a white facade to boot. Its scale is illustrious. It's every princess's dream castle. Although its light coloring gives it quite a delicate appeal, it is a good example of medieval military defense architecture. It was built in the late 14th and early 15th century, but destroyed and ran to ruins for 2 centuries. In 1810, Napoleon I bought it for less than 3,000 francs. It was restored and became a monument in 1862. Since then, it's been featured in films and TV, so you'll probably recognize it from the screen. Nur Mahal, Pakistan. This castle is a real showstopper and is still a functioning house for state guests and foreign delegations. It was built in the 18th century under the reign of Nawab Sadiq Muhammad Khan IV. It has a unique mix of Islamic and Corinthian architecture with a bit of subcontinental style. Its interiors are elaborate and furnished with pieces from Italy and England. It is managed by the Pakistan Army and is open to the public for tours. The Matsumoto Castle, Japan. This castle is unlike any we have seen on this list so far. Its exterior is black, an unusual but really striking color choice. It follows traditional Japanese castle design, showing elements of Japanese culture and structure. The detailed and meticulous craftsmanship is a marvel of its own. The origins of this castle go back to 1504. TRAKAI Island Castle, Lithuania. TRAKAI Island Castle has changed hands too many times to note here, and with each change in hands came renovations and additions. The castle was built over several phases, with the first phase beginning in the 14th century. The castle served as a home, a summer retreat, and a prison at one point. It's open for visitors, so you can really delve into history when you're there.
Those really are a ton of incredible castles, and we barely scratched the surface of most of them. But before we move on, let's go back to the question I asked earlier. The oldest inhabited castle in the world is Windsor Castle, the favorite of the Queen of England. I was actually lucky enough to visit Windsor Castle. Here are a couple photos that I took of the grounds while I was there. Doesn't it look amazing?
1. Bojnic Castle, Slovakia. If you had to pick a castle to rule over, we think this would probably be the top of most people's list. You can't get dreamier than the Bojnic Castle. It even has a moat. It's easy to see why it's one of the most visited attractions in Slovakia. It's become a popular venue for art and events and hosts the annual International Festival of Ghosts and Spooks.